if I could just pass over now to my colleague Annie Jenkinson to introduce herself. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Rachel. So good evening, everybody. So my name's Annie Jenkinson. I'm the Learning Support Coordinator here at Ringwood School. Well, not here because I'm in my home, but and I also teach history in school. And this last couple of years, I've been involved with setting up a reading project, which we are piloting this year with Year 9, so with your children, and we're very excited about that. So I'd just like to explain a little bit about the project. So Rachel, if you'd like to start the PowerPoint, that would be lovely.
Lovely, thank you, Annie. And I should have said at the beginning that I'm Rachel Heaver-Webb. I'm an assistant head teacher with responsibility for assessment and exams, but also an English teacher. So really loving the chance to support Annie with this. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully just in a second you will all see the PowerPoint that Annie's going to use to present to you. So as soon as it lets me, I'm going to start sharing that PowerPoint. Just going to go back. There we go. And over to you, Annie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. So just a couple of quotes there on the front, which I'm sure will resonate with you. I particularly like the first one, Carl Sagan. One of the greatest gifts adults can give to their offspring and to their society is to read to children. And that's going to be very much a theme this evening, the idea about adults continuing to read to children. Something which I think that we all do when our children are much younger, but perhaps as they get older, as they get into the teenage years, perhaps not so much. So we will touch on that. If I could have the next slide, Rachel, please. So the aims for this evening is to really explain why we're doing this, so what our rationale for the Year 9 reading project is, to give you an outline about how the project is being delivered in school, and to give you an opportunity, if you would like to post any questions via the chat facility. Thank you, Rachel. So I think really what we'd like to stress tonight, and it will be something I think that you will be very familiar with this side, that reading really is the key skill for our young people. And again, that quote at the top, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. It really does unlock doors. It is just such a key skill. When children are confident, when students are confident readers, they move from that learning to read, which they do in the primary school years, to really reading to learn. And I think it's that for us, it's that moving from being somebody who can basically read to actually somebody who is what we might call a strategic reader, somebody who is able to use those reading skills to really engage with academic texts and also with literature, and really learn and develop their intelligence through that act of reading. There's been so much research about reading, and as well as that kind of reading to learn, we know ourselves when we're reading fiction in particular, that we can get so caught up in a story, we can get so caught up with characters, that it is really helping to develop our empathy skills. And obviously this is something that we would really love to nurture in our young people. So those skills of empathy, obviously hugely important. And I think that links into that importance for our mental health and well-being. And certainly over that lockdown period that we've all been through together, the importance of reading during that time has been huge. Certainly been for me personally has been a real sort of lifesaver, and I think for a lot of people that opportunity to read more has actually been quite welcome. So again, for our young people going through the teenage years, that opportunity to read regularly and to engage with fiction, hugely important for that well-being. And then the other part of it, I think that's so very important, is the impact that reading has on our young people's vocabulary and their comprehension skills. And an interesting statistic there from Ofsted from last year, that 90% of vocabulary is encountered in reading rather than through everyday speech. So that means that for our students to really acquire that vocabulary that they're going to need in life in general, but for their academic subjects, their academic studies, it is really important that they are reading and developing that vocabulary through that. And we know, and again, there are plenty of statistics, that students who read regularly, and that very much is about reading fiction, that really does impact on their academic attainment. They're developing so many skills as they read, and that does link through to those all important grades at GCSE and beyond. So really just the key skill, which we can't stress enough how vital that is to our young people. Thank you. If I could have the next slide. So I mentioned vocabulary there, and I think it is really important to just think about a child's journey as they move through secondary school. And we've just been welcoming, obviously, our new Year 7s, but also your children back into school. And as they move through school, they are exposed to that ever more complex vocabulary, and that is in a range of subjects. So but very much for our new Year 7s coming in, they're encountering history, science lessons, obviously the literature that they're starting to look at in English. So there's a lot of different vocabulary that they're facing, and as they move up towards, certainly move into GCSE, that vocabulary becomes ever more complex. And that is a real challenge for our students. And again, it's about that moving from being a reader, being somebody who can read, who's got those perhaps that the required level, the age related at Year 6, but as they move through secondary school, suddenly that complexity of language, complexity of vocabulary is really increasing. So it's thought that a reader does need to know about 98% of words in a text to comfortably be able to comprehend it. And there are various exercises where if you substitute 2% of the text with words, just sort of letters really, that you can still work out what the text means. But the minute you sort of start to make that 5% or even 10%, it becomes very, very difficult to really comprehend a text. And that could be what it could feel like for our young people if they don't have that knowledge of vocabulary, that percent is missing as they read a text. And that is going to really impact obviously on their understanding and on their ability to respond to a text, and really sort of impact ultimately on them academically and their attainment. And we talk about different tiers of vocabulary. So if we think of the tier 1 vocabulary as your sort of very familiar everyday words, and your tier 3 vocabulary as being that subject specific vocabulary, that will be taught through the students' subjects, through their teachers, their individual teachers in history and science, in technology, in art, and so on. They will be, and your children will often be bringing home lists of vocabulary for subjects, and there will be sort of keywords that they're needing to learn. We can that is the part that is perhaps a little bit easier. The difficulty is the tier 2, the bit in the middle. And those are the words that aren't subject specific necessarily, but are words that can become real barriers to students and can prevent them from comprehending effectively. So if I just have the next slide, I can show you exactly what I mean by that.
Of course, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 minute,
Yeah.
Annie, to say something I should have said at the beginning
Right.
to everybody, which is simply that if you do have any questions as Annie's going through this information, please just, as you're very familiar with now, just pop them in the chat and we'll respond to them as soon as we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. So this is an example from art and design, so GCSE level art and design. And you can see there those tier 3 words on the left. So those are those subject specific words that as I say, the students would be taught by their teachers. They may be asked to look those words up, find out what they mean, but they'll be using them in their lessons quite frequently, and they'll become very familiar with them. The words on the right are just that bit more obscure. So there'd be words that, again, these tier 2 words, which could come up in questions, and they would be relevant to that subject, but maybe the student hasn't encountered them. So we're very kind of aware that, as I say, that can become quite a barrier. And so we can teach them lists of these words. But again, the research shows that if it's much more powerful if you teach those words through the context of, for example, fiction, or giving examples, real life examples where those words are much more relevant for the student, and therefore they come to understand what they mean. And then when they're encountering them through those questions at GCSE level, they're much more familiar with them. Thank you, Rachel. We could have the next slide. So talking about reading fiction, so as I mentioned, something that I personally enjoyed a lot during that lockdown period, and we know that a lot of our students enjoyed reading as well. So the benefits of reading fiction, it's been shown that tier 2 vocabulary really is developed through the reading of fiction. It really does impact on it, because, as I say, they're seeing those words in the context of the literature, and that therefore they're developing that deeper understanding, and that is where that reading is so vital. And we're very mindful that if it suddenly stops or it really tails off as our students are moving through the school, that is going to become quite a problem, that they're really not going to be acquiring that level of vocabulary. And we really want, through their reading, that our students will develop active reading strategies. And again, this relates to subjects like history and English, where they're being asked to make inferences, or they're being asked to predict. So those sort of skills we really want to develop, and we want to make sure that we're explicitly teaching those strategies, those skills to the students. So and the way that fiction really provides rich opportunities for discussion is also such a clear benefit. Lots and lots of themes that will come through a work of literature, through a novel, key themes, insights into other worlds, human challenges, experiences and motivations. So many kinds of such a rich world there for our young people to experience, and obviously adults to experience as well. So many benefits really of reading fiction, and that is obviously what the project is very much all about. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so we've decided, having sort of done a lot of research into the benefits of reading, knowing in our hearts that that reading is so very, very important. But we kind of felt that we wanted to look at how we could really build reading into the school day. I just need to go back a slide, Rachel, actually. So just need to go, I think it's...
I'm very sorry, I'm trying, but it's not wanting to do that. So we might have to just stick onto this one. I'm sorry, Annie.
That's okay, not a problem. Right, I'll just have a look, just check. Yeah. So really just talking about the impact of just even a small increase in the amount of reading that students are doing. So we know that just by going from 5 minutes to 20 minutes of reading a day actually can make a massive difference. So that doesn't sound like a huge amount, but obviously cumulatively that becomes sort of a significant amount of reading in a week. And again, lots and lots of evidence that can translate through to much better attainment. So just that small increase can really make a difference. We know that, as I've said, that reading for pleasure, very much something I know our primary colleagues really foster in those primary years. And as our children join us in year 7, we're encouraging them very much to read and showing them the library and so on. But we know from students that we've spoken to that sort of reading for pleasure does start to tail off, and it seems to tail off particularly around about year 8, year 9. And obviously that is the wrong time, because that is the time that we really need them to be acquiring all that wonderful vocabulary that they're going to need, particularly for GCSE. So for that reason, you might be thinking, well, why year 9? So that was one of the main reasons that we felt that was a really good point to introduce this project. And we have decided, because we needed to have some dedicated time, and that was really very important, that we were able to say, this is our time when we will be reading. So we've decided to make use of our tutor times, and we're actually using 3 tutor times a week to deliver the reading programme. And so 3 times a week, your children will be reading in that tutor lesson, and that equates to about that 20 minutes of reading time. It's not every day, because obviously there are a lot of pressures on that tutor time. There are important messages that need to be given out, there are things to be given out, there's photos to be given out, all sorts of things. So we're competing a little bit with that, but the way we've got around it is we're saying that we've got these 3 dedicated days, and that's when we will read, and we will do nothing else. That's very much what we do on those days. So just before I move on to the books, because I'll talk about the books in a second, just want to mention about being read to. And so, we've talked about perhaps young people will read less, but they may still be reading, doing some reading, but mostly it'll be now that they're 13, 14, that they'll be reading on their own, so it could be silent reading. Again, a lot of research that being read to is really, really beneficial, and just having that adult reading a text out loud, they're then modelling the reading fluency, they're modelling all the vocabulary, they're modelling strategies and skills that the student can then use themselves. They're able to really home in on vocabulary, explore it, talk about it, discuss it. And also, as you'll know, if you hear something being read, you hear that phrasing, you hear the intonation, the voice changing subtly, and that all helps with your understanding. And so just the process of hearing that reading is really important. So what we've decided is, rather than having students doing silent reading, which they still do at some in some parts of the day, obviously in some of their lessons they would be being asked to read something and then respond to it in some way. But in that tutor time session, they will be being read to. So their tutor, who is obviously somebody who knows them well and who they know well, is that person. So that's where it's quite interesting, because obviously our tutors are not necessarily used to doing that, and they've been absolutely amazing, really positive about having this opportunity to read to their students, and that is a really sort of powerful thing, we feel, for the students to be being read to. We're also giving them opportunities to read aloud themselves, but without putting any pressure on anybody. So asking some student readers sometimes to just read a small paragraph, just so that we have that sort of sense of it being an enjoyable collective community experience in our tutor groups. So what are the books? So the books that we're reading this term are either The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins or Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. So those are the two books that they're reading at the moment. And that's split into sides of the year. So the right-hand side of the year is reading Noughts and Crosses, and the left-hand side of The Hunger Games. They will swap over in the summer term, so they will all read those two books. Very difficult to make choices about which books to read, because obviously we know that some of our students will have read those two titles. We know that some of them may have seen the film or the TV adaptation of Noughts and Crosses, for example. But we do feel, on balance, that they are really good quality works of literature, and they've got a lot of popular appeal for young people. They just seem very relevant to the age that they're at, and also they tackle really relevant, important themes. For example, power, individual freedom, racism, teenage relationships, all those sort of things come into both of those novels, really. So really interesting books to read. Both part of a series of books as well. So our hope is that some of them, even if they've read that one, they might go on and read other books by the same authors. But yes, two books that we've started with, and we will be getting feedback from the students. We know, as I say, some of them may have read those titles, but certainly I think there can be value in going back and reading again, and perhaps clarifying bits that you might have misunderstood, or certainly vocabulary that you weren't sure of. So quite a lot of benefits there. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so we sort of did kind of adapt our ideas as we planned the reading that your children are doing, and one of the things we started with was the idea that they would all read classics. We've opted for a compromise in the end, but we have got one classic in there. So as well as reading, as I say, The Hunger Games and Noughts and Crosses in the autumn and the summer term, in the spring term, the students will read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Chosen that it's quite a short novel, but it's really, really interesting. We don't think they'll have read it, and it also links to the work that they will have been doing in history about the 1920s. So we think that will be one that they will enjoy. The language, as you would expect, the vocabulary that they will encounter in that novel will be more challenging, and so I will be preparing resources to support both the tutors and the students in kind of really getting the most out of that particular novel. So yes, that's something to look forward to in the spring, The Great Gatsby. So thank you, Rachel. So how do the tutor sessions work? So I prepared materials obviously to support those tutors. As I've said, they have been absolutely wonderful. They've really embraced this project. Really, a lot of them just really relishing the chance to read to their students, their tutees. But it's quite a lot, isn't it, if you're going to be teaching science all day, to come in the morning and pick up a novel and read it and get the most out of it for the students. So they have prepared materials that they can use, which identify that key vocabulary that I was referring to, and also a lot of suggested questions, and lots of opportunities to practice those skills of inference, prediction, summarising, and we would build in at the start of a session a bit of a recap. And so lots of opportunities for the students to get involved in discussion, but the prime purpose is the reading and the hearing the reading. So that is the sort of majority of each of the sessions. The students have a bookmark that goes with the books, their individual bookmark, and they've got space on that, they've got lines on it to just record some of the key vocabulary that they are being taught. And then just to reinforce it all a little bit more, we have posters in their tutor classrooms, which have a synopsis of the novel, key vocabulary, some of the key themes, some of the key ideas, because we want to kind of make it not just about the book in isolation, but, you know, thinking a bit broader and opening up some of those kind of interesting conversations and discussions. So obviously our prime aim here, as well as, you know, that we can see the benefit in the long run to our students, particularly the sort of academic side of things. We just really want them to enjoy it. We really want them to enjoy the whole, just the whole experience of that dedicated time, 3 times a week, with their tutor, with their classmates, their fellow tutees, listening to, you know, really kind of gripping novel being read to them, and then we really hope that as they're listening to that, they'll be picking up on those skills and that vocabulary. But it's a project. We're doing it this year with Year 9. Really want to roll it out to other year groups after this year, but we'll be evaluating it carefully, because obviously, you know, there's cost involved, and it means if you're doing this, it's possibly at the expense of something else. So we do want to think about, has it helped our young people? You know, we'll evaluate it by getting feedback from the students, looking at sort of data as well. But that will be sort of part of the process at the end of the project in the summer. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, thank you very much, Annie. That's the last slide, I believe,
Yeah.
isn't it, Annie? I'm not about, yes, lovely, thank you. So I'm just going to stop sharing our screen. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Annie. I hope you found that a really useful and informative half an hour. We did say it'd be half an hour, and it's bang on the nose of half an hour. And thank you for your questions that you've been posting throughout. I hope that we have answered them. I can just see there's just one more. Oh, lovely, somebody who said their child has already come home talking about one of the books, so that's a really nice one to end on. So thank you very much. But if anything else does strike you, then obviously just get in touch with your son or your daughter's tutor, and if you have feedback, then please ask your son or your daughter to pass it on to their tutor as well, because as Annie said, it's really important that we do evaluate as we go along, and at the end what the impact of this is, because we want it clearly to help to engender both growing skills and also a real love of reading in our young people. So we are really excited to be able to have the time with your sons and daughters to do this, and a lovely, lovely thing for their tutors to be able to do, who have entirely embraced it and are really enjoying what they're doing each 3 times a week with your sons and your daughters. So we will end the meeting there. Thank you very much, and we look forward to perhaps having a meeting in person at some point in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.